Hashtag the river that refused to stop them, March 7, 1945. The Ludendorff Bridge at Rimingen. 3:17 in the afternoon. The Rhine runs cold beneath the iron latticework, its current swift and indifferent to the war raging on its banks. German combat. Engineer Hauptmann Karl Friesenhahn stands at the detonation station, his hand trembling not from fear but from exhaustion. For 3 years, he has been taught that rivers are Germany's greatest defensive asset, natural barriers that buy time, fracture enemy momentum, demand respect. The Rhine, they said, would be impassable for months. It would take the Americans until summer to build the pontoons, assemble the steel, coordinate the logistics. But through the haze of artillery smoke, Friesenhahn can already see them. American engineers swarming like ants across the damaged bridge, carrying timber and cable, their movements unnaturally fast, almost mechanical in their efficiency. The bridge should be gone. The charges should have dropped it into the river, but the detonation failed, and now something impossible is happening. The Americans are not slowing down, they are not waiting, they are crossing. This moment, this single bridge, this one failure would crystallize a realization that had been building in the minds of German engineers since Normandy, since the Siegfried Line, since the bitter winter in the Ardennes. The Americans did not fight rivers the way Europeans did. They did not accept them as obstacles. They treated them as inconveniences. For generations, European military doctrine had revered the river crossing as one of warfare's most perilous undertakings. The Germans, inheritors of Prussian engineering tradition, had refined this doctrine into an art form. During their blitzkrieg campaigns, Wehrmacht engineers demonstrated extraordinary skill, pontoon bridges erect under fire, ferries improvised from captured materials, bridgeheads secured with brutal efficiency. They crossed the Meuse in 1914, less than a day. They forced the Dnieper in 1941 against Soviet resistance. These were triumphs of planning, discipline, and engineering precision. Rivers, in German understanding, were challenges to be studied, calculated, and overcome through meticulous preparation. But the Americans, these industrial newcomers, these sons of mass production, approached rivers with a philosophy that seemed almost reckless to German observers, where German engineers carefully calculated load capacities and stress tolerances. American engineers simply built stronger, where Wehrmacht doctrine called for securing both banks before beginning a crossing. American forces began building bridges while soldiers were still fighting on the far shore. It was not better engineering, German officers told themselves. It was brute force. It was waste. It was the American way. Throw enough material at a problem, and it would eventually yield. Yet privately, in captured documents and prisoner interrogations, a different story emerged. German engineers were not dismissing American methods. They were studying them with a mixture of professional admiration and ideological confusion. How could a nation that seemed so chaotic, so individualistic, so undisciplined, produce military engineering of such devastating speed and scale? Oberst Heinrich Bauer, a decorated combat engineer who had served since Poland, was captured near the Ruhr River in February 1945. During his interrogation, he was shown photographs of American bridging operations. The images depicted scenes he had witnessed firsthand but still struggled to comprehend. Prefabricated bridge sections being assembled in darkness, entire battalions of engineers working in coordinated shifts, pontoon bridges carrying 40-ton Sherman tanks within hours of the first reconnaissance. Bauer studied the photographs in silence, then spoke carefully, choosing his words as if confessing a heresy. "We were taught that bridging is an exact science," he said. "Every calculation must be perfect, every measurement precise. A bridge is only as strong as its weakest component, so every component must be individually verified." He paused, tapping one photograph showing an American treadway bridge spanning the Ruhr. But they do not build bridges, they manufacture them. Like automobiles, like refrigerators, the components are identical, interchangeable. A soldier does not need to understand the engineering, he only needs to connect section A to section B. It is not elegant, but it is fast, extraordinarily fast. What Bell had witnessed was the M2 treadway bridge system, a piece of military engineering that embodied American industrial philosophy. Each steel treadway section weighed 650 pounds and could be carried by 6 men. The sections locked together with pins and brackets designed for speed, not permanence. A trained engineer company could span a 150-foot river in under 3 hours, even under artillery fire. The bridge was neither beautiful nor sophisticated by German standards. It was essentially a floating road, crude and utilitarian, but it worked. More importantly, it could be replicated endlessly, assembled by soldiers with minimal training, and replaced if destroyed. The Germans built bridges to last. The Americans built bridges to be everywhere. The ideological implications gnawed at German engineering officers in ways that battlefield defeats did not. They had been raised in a tradition that celebrated the master craftsman, the expert who understood every principle underlying his work. German military academies taught engineering as a discipline of mind, a test of intellectual rigor. Officers studied fluid dynamics, structural mechanics, metallurgical properties. They could calculate the exact buoyancy needed for a pontoon bridge, the precise tensile strength required for a cable suspension. This knowledge was a mark of superiority, proof of German Gründlichkeit, thoroughness, depth, the quality of doing things properly. But the Americans had bypassed that entire tradition. They had industrialized the process, reduced it to assembly line simplicity, and in doing so they had made expertise less necessary. A lieutenant with 3 months of training could direct a bridging operation that would have required a seasoned German Hauptmann with years of study. It was not that American engineers were better educated. Interrogation reports suggested quite the opposite. It was that they operated within a system that did not require individual brilliance. The system itself was the genius. Major Wilhelm Stemmler, captured at Remagen, articulated this realization with bitter clarity during a conversation with British intelligence officers. "You're Americans," he said, using the possessive deliberately. "They have democratized warfare. A German engineer must be exceptional. An American engineer must simply follow instructions. This is your strength, and it is intolerable to witness, intolerable, because it challenged the foundational myth of German superiority. The Reich had justified its conquests through narratives of excellence, of Teutonic discipline, overcoming Slavic chaos, German science surpassing decadent Western materialism. But what did excellence matter when quantity and speed could overwhelm it? What good was a perfectly calculated bridge if the enemy built 3 imperfect ones in the same time? The Rhine crossings of March 1945 became, for German engineers, a sequence of cascading impossibilities. After the failure at Remagen, Wehrmacht command expected the Americans to consolidate, to wait for supplies, to respect the river's power. Instead, within 2 weeks, the U.S. Army had forced crossings at Oppenheim, Boppard, and St. Goar. At Oppenheim, Patton's Third Army began crossing on the night of March 22nd, without even preparatory artillery bombardment. Engineers simply paddled across in assault boats, secured the far bank, and began assembling pontoon bridges by moonlight. By dawn, tanks were rolling across. The entire operation, from first boat to functioning bridge, took less than 8 hours. German observers watching from positions in the hills could not reconcile what they saw with their understanding of military possibility. The Americans were not careful. They did not stop when fired upon. They did not retreat when a pontoon section was destroyed. They simply brought up another section and continued. The river, which should have been an ally, a defender of the fatherland, had become irrelevant. In captured German war diaries, the language shifts noticeably during this period. Earlier entries describe American tactics with professional detachment, sometimes with contempt. But by March 1945, the tone becomes something else, not quite fear, but a kind of exhausted awe. One pioneer battalion commander wrote, "They do not fight the river. They ignore it, as if rivers are not real obstacles, but merely wet roads requiring different equipment. I do not know how to counter an enemy who refuses to acknowledge the difficulty of what they are doing." The symbolic heart of this conflict was not steel or concrete, but something simpler, the ubiquitous American timber. German engineers, accustomed to working with carefully milled lumber and precise measurements, were astounded by American field engineering techniques. U.S. Army engineers would cut local trees, rough trim them on site, and incorporate them into bridge structures within hours. The wood was not treated, not measured to exacting standards, not expected to last beyond the immediate tactical need. German doctrine would have rejected such improvisation as unprofessional, but American bridges built from green timber and field expedients carry the weight of Sherman tanks and GMC trucks in unending convoys. Lieutenant Otto Krebs, a bridge specialist captured at the Saar River, described what American engineers construct a timber trestle bridge under floodlights. They worked through the night, he recalled. The lights made them perfect targets, but they did not stop. Men would be wounded, carried away, and replaced within minutes. The rhythm never broke. By morning the bridge was complete. It was not a German bridge, it wobbled under load. The timber groaned. I would not have trusted it personally, but trucks crossed all day without pause. He hesitated, then added, they built it to be used, not to be admired. I think this distinction escaped us until too late. That rough-cut timber, unseasoned, imperfect, expendable, became a silent symbol of American military philosophy. It represented abundance, the assumption that materials were unlimited, that failures could be replaced, that speed mattered more than perfection. For German engineers, each timber beam was a resource to be conserved, allocated, justified. For Americans, timber was just another item in an infinite supply chain, available on request, disposable if necessary. The transformation in German military thinking was not immediate, but it was profound. Officers who survived the Rhine crossings and later interrogations spoke of a psychological shift, a collapse of certainty. They had been taught to believe that German technical education was superior, that German engineering represented the apex of military science. But the Rhine had revealed a different kind of superiority, not elegance, not depth of knowledge, but relentless industrial capacity wedded to pragmatic simplicity. Some German engineers, particularly younger ones, adapted quickly. Captured documents show field modifications to German bridging technique, attempts to incorporate American-style modularity and speed, but these efforts came too late and were hampered by material shortages. The Reich, by 1945, could barely produce ammunition, much less standardized bridge components by the thousand. The irony was crushing. German engineers finally understood the American approach, but lacked the industrial base to replicate it. Others retreated into bitterness. In POW camps, older officers insisted that American methods were crude, wasteful, the product of a nation that had never known scarcity. They throw away more steel in a week than we produce in a month. One captured major complained. It is not engineering, it is excess. But even these criticisms carried an undertone of despair, the recognition that excess, when sufficiently overwhelming, becomes its own form of excellence. April 1945, the Elbe River, evening light slanting through smoke. The war is ending, though some still fight. A German engineering company, down to 18 men, watches from a demolished rail yard as American engineers assemble yet another bridge. The Rhine is behind them, along with a dozen other rivers that failed to stop the advance. This bridge will be complete by morning. There will be another one 10 kilometers south, and another 20 kilometers north. The rivers have not run dry, but they might as well have. An Obergefreiter, barely 20 years old, asks his commander, "Why can they do this, Herr Hauptmann? Why are they so fast?" The Hauptmann, a veteran of France and Russia, a man who once took pride in his profession, looks at the American engineers working under arc lights. He thinks of the calculations he made at university, the elegant equations that describe stress and shear. He thinks of bridges his grandfather built in Bavaria, stone arches that stood for centuries. He thinks of the timber being hammered into place across the Elbe, wood that will rot before winter, steel that will be salvaged and melted down for peacetime uses. Because they do not build for forever, he says finally. They build for tomorrow, and tomorrow they will build again. The river runs beneath them, all German, American, indifferent. It has seen armies cross for 1,000 years, seen empires rise, and drown. But it has never seen anything like this. Engineers who treat water as a minor impediment, who span chasms with the casual confidence of a nation that believes no obstacle is permanent, no challenge insurmountable. This was the lesson German engineers learned too late. That ideology, training, and tradition could be overwhelmed by a simpler creed, the belief that any problem could be solved with enough material, enough men, and enough unwillingness to accept defeat. The Americans did not revere the river. They did not fear it. They simply crossed it, built their road, and moved forward. And in that relentless forward motion, in that rough-cut timber, prefabricated steel, lay a truth more decisive than any battle there. The future belonged not to those who perfected the old ways, but to those who invented new ones faster than the enemy could adapt. The river ran on. The bridges multiplied. And the war, with its ancient certainties and proud traditions, gave way to something else, something industrial, democratic, and utterly unstoppable.